Welcome in. This is Matt Miller with PolitiBrawl, and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, just went nuclear on the New York Times during this live sit-down, and he was telling off this reporter, Andrew Ross Sorkin, for how the New York Times covered and covered up for the Biden administration and Biden's lack of mental competence. Meanwhile, it's going after and accusing Trump of being mentally incompetent. This is the most active, engaged, and sharp president we've had in a long time. Watch Scott Bessent take him down.
The question is, is this like a new normal?
Andrew, there's no new normal, and I can tell you that I actually don't read the New York Times anymore. That sometimes I do watch CNBC. But occasionally people send me articles, and there's just this fever swamp. And you're now a pop historian with 1929, and in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the New York Times is no longer the paper of record. You can't go. I read this article. President Trump is slowing down. President Trump's mental capacity. It is 100% fake. That he only called me twice at 2 a.m. last week instead of 3 times.
You're saying he called you? I believe that he called you at 2 or 3 in the morning.
That whole narrative, and this is why this is why young people are going to TikTok. This story, somebody else sent it to me. Mike Johnson is beleaguered that he and his wife were so tired. They gave actually a very sympathetic and funny interview that somehow got twisted on the pages of the New York Times into this. It's just.
Let me say this though, just if I could. I think that what's happening here, and I will just defend that article for a moment, not because I had nothing to do with it, but I think part of it is, if you remember, the media, including the Times and others, got criticized for not raising more issues around the health of Joe Biden. You remember this? And by the way, we did actually on this stage with the Vice President of the United States back then. But nonetheless, I think there was a lot of criticism about that. And so I think there's now a renewed sense that given people's age, that we should be doing more in that space. I don't want to overstate it. It's not something I wrote. But I'm just trying to.
You had what was one of the greatest scandals of all time, that the coverage of the Biden administration, Joe Biden's diminished capacity, and the cover-up.
And that's why it's probably fair to raise these questions.
Where was the New York Times? We just had a 3-hour cabinet meeting yesterday, Andrew. For 10 months, the Biden administration did not have a cabinet meeting. How are you going to invoke the 25th Amendment if the cabinet secretaries never see the president, which they didn't? That I hear from people in the Treasury building that I see President Trump more in a day than my predecessor saw Joe Biden in half a year. So
I'm not taking the position.
He's got no response.
One way or the other. I'm just saying I think it's a fair question to at least raise.
Well, look, I think this is why you just wrote a book. People in 20, 30, 40, 50 years deserve to know what really happened, as opposed to, again, people send me these stories from the New York Times, and the headlines are not that different than the Daily Beast and the Huff Post.
Let's end this conversation on a subject that I think everybody on a bipartisan basis can probably.
You know what? Good. He just gives up. He's got no legs to stand on there. That's ridiculous. And Scott Bessent is 100% correct. This is why everybody is losing faith in the mainstream media, or has already lost faith in the mainstream media, except for these journalists and Washington, D.C. elites. That's who they're really writing for. They don't care. They're protecting the narrative of the establishment. That's all they do. That's what they get paid to do. And that's why so many Americans are turning to independent media outlets like PolitiBrawl, or like you said, going to TikTok, going to other independent outlets. There's so many great ones now. The Trump administration has done a lot to institutionalize and legitimize some of the smaller independent voices in the media. We see Caroline Leavitt featuring new voices all the time in the White House press briefings. It's really a disgrace what the New York Times was involved with, covering for the fact that Biden was totally incompetent and wasn't really acting like the president. They were complicit in that. They took part in that. They created this whole cover-up. And the Washington Post, many other outlets as well were guilty of this. We all know it. Even this reporter knows it, and that's why he decided to give up on the conversation. And I think it's a good thing that Trump, I don't know how he's going to take action on it, but he has the idea that he's going to delegitimize the pardons that Biden made with the auto pen. We know that he wasn't the one signing these things. There's most of the stuff in his administration, especially toward the end, was probably not him. He had nothing to do with it. The guy, look, I feel bad for him. He's an old guy. He's lost it. I don't hate him and I don't wish ill will on him, but like, people in his administration did illegal things to pretend that he was the president. He was making these decisions. He was signing these pardons and signing these orders. And we know that that just cannot be the case. Now, Scott Bessent responded to this epic takedown to the New York Times on Fox News. Let's check it out.
Sean, I made the mistake of thinking Andrew Ross Sorkin, who's on CNBC, has a much better co-host, Joe Kernan, invited me, and he said, well, we're going to have a conversation. And we got there, and he just immediately went into attack and gotcha mode. And I just couldn't take the hypocrisy of it all. And I guess he had to play to the New York Times audience, the DealBook audience there at Lincoln Center. And I just had to fact check him. And I believe that the New York Times...
Oh, you did more than fact check him. You checkmated him.
Well, again, it's just, as they used to say on Dragnet, just the facts. And I don't read the
Joe Friday. Yeah.
I don't read the Times anymore, but people send me articles, and the last couple of articles I've gotten are just so far from the truth. And I was sitting there thinking, what are people, like, how are people going to construct the historical narrative of this great second Trump presidency in an accurate way when the supposed paper record is so far off?
That's a great question and an important question. The New York Times, it's important to look at what is the pipeline for the people who are involved with writing the New York Times. A lot of them, they come out of these liberal universities, these liberal journalism schools, and they are taught and trained to have a certain opinion and protect the right people, the right ideas. They're not doing real journalism, and that's why you get the end product that you see. And this is the case for many outlets, not just the New York Times. Many of the respected, illustrious outlets in the American media happen to be propped up and produced by people who have left-wing, pro-establishment worldviews, or as far to the right as they get is probably neoconservative, again, very establishment uniparty. They're not interested in reporting on the behalf of the American people and the American people's interests, what they deserve to know. The American people deserve to know that Joe Biden was losing it, that their president was not functioning in a full capacity. He did not have his faculties in order, and the guy was not actually acting as our president. So what did CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post do? They covered it up. The fact is, President Trump is one of the most active presidents that we've seen in a long time. The guy never sleeps. He's traveling to all these different countries, making all these different deals, dealing with hundreds of issues all at once. The guy has a tremendous amount of energy. You have to admit that. And they're trying to spin it and produce this story, produce this narrative that he's crazy, that he's losing it based on the way he talks, when he's off the cuff or when he's just joking around. They take it seriously, and then they say, wow, he's worse than Joe Biden. Well, you know what? If you care about President Trump allegedly losing it and that he's not all there, he's getting too old, what were you saying when Biden was clearly losing it? Because we saw so many pundits, so many journalists and media personalities defending him, saying, no, that's ridiculous. Biden's as strong as I've ever seen him. He's as sharp. I can't keep up with him. He's a genius. Just egregious lies to the American people. So if you care about this now, I want to see, what were you saying back then when Biden was clearly beyond the pale? What were you saying back then? Are you consistent? Were you concerned about both? And this guy, he knows. He tried to bring up that argument, Andrew Ross Sorkin, saying, well, we got attacked for not covering Biden's mental decline, so now we're really covering Trump's. No, you're just being a hypocrite. Plain and simple. So good on Scott Bessent calling it out here right in front of the New York Times, in front of the whole crowd. Absolutely what we need to see more of. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you guys get notified when we post brand new videos here on PolitiBrawl. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you next time.